"Next," called the loan officer. But Robert Stevens couldn't move. His trained eye had spotted something terrifying. The three men near the entrance were positioning themselves in a classic robbery formation. After 22 years as head of bank security, he knew exactly what was about to happen. But today, he wasn't the protector. He was just another customer about to become a victim. What the three armed men didn't realize was that their helpless victim in the loan department had personally designed every security measure they were about to encounter, and knew exactly how to turn those defenses into weapons. Welcome to Real Security Stories, where we uncover the moments when experience meets crisis in the most unexpected ways. Before we dive into this incredible story of role reversal, hidden expertise, and the thin line between protector and protected, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe that some knowledge never leaves you, no matter how circumstances change, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter. Robert Stevens sat in the customer service area of First National Bank, clutching a loan application that felt heavier than it should. At 54, he had never imagined he would be on this side of the mahogany desk, asking for help instead of providing protection. The $10,000 personal loan application in his hands represented everything he had once stood against: financial desperation, vulnerability, and the kind of life situation that made people targets. 22 years. That's how long Robert had served as head of security for First National Bank. He had started as a junior guard fresh out of the military police, and had worked his way up to become one of the most respected security directors in the regional banking system. His innovations had prevented countless robberies. His training programs had saved lives, and his reputation had made him a consultant for banks across 3 states. But all of that had ended 18 months ago with a single phone call from corporate headquarters. "Robert, we're restructuring the security department," the regional manager had said. "We're consolidating all security operations to our central facility. Your position is being eliminated. Budget cuts, technological upgrades, centralized monitoring systems." The same phrases that had been destroying careers across the banking industry for the past 5 years. Robert's decades of experience, his intimate knowledge of every security protocol, his personal relationships with local law enforcement, none of it mattered in the face of automated systems and cost-cutting measures. The severance package had lasted 8 months. Unemployment benefits had stretched another 6. Now, with his savings depleted and his pension still 7 years away, Robert was back in the same bank where he had once commanded respect, asking for money to keep his house out of foreclosure. Sitting in the customer waiting area, Robert couldn't help but notice how much the bank had changed since his departure. New carpet, updated lighting, and a completely different layout for the teller station. But the bones of the building remained the same: the reinforced walls he had insisted on, the camera positions he had specified, the panic buttons he had installed. More importantly, the security weaknesses he had identified and worked to address were still there, hidden beneath the cosmetic improvements. The blind spot near the entrance where the architectural column created a camera shadow. The delayed response time between the silent alarm and the security company's notification. The fact that the bank's emergency lockdown procedure took 47 seconds to fully engage. Robert had documented every vulnerability, every potential threat, every possible scenario in detailed reports that were filed away in some corporate archive. He had lived and breathed bank security for over 2 decades. Learning not just how to protect against robberies, but how to think like the criminals who might attempt them. Today, that knowledge felt like a burden rather than a blessing. "Mr. Stevens," the loan officer's voice cut through his thoughts. "I'm ready for you now." Robert stood up, straightening his jacket, his only decent suit, purchased 8 years ago for his daughter's wedding. As he walked toward the loan officer's desk, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. 3 men near the entrance were moving in a pattern he recognized immediately. Robert's military and security training kicked in instantly. His breathing slowed, his vision sharpened, and his mind began cataloging details with the automatic precision of someone who had spent decades preparing for exactly this scenario. The first man was positioned near the entrance, ostensibly reading a brochure but actually monitoring the foot traffic and timing the entry patterns. The second was at the new account desk, filling out paperwork that he wasn't actually completing while surveying the teller stations. The third was using the ATM in the corner, but his attention was focused on the security camera positions and the locations of bank personnel. It was textbook robbery reconnaissance, executed with the kind of coordination that suggested these weren't amateur criminals. They were professionals who had studied the bank's layout, its procedures, and its vulnerabilities. They were doing everything right, except for one crucial mistake. They were doing it in front of the man who had designed the very security measures they were trying to circumvent. Robert's hand trembled slightly as he shook hands with the loan officer. Not from fear, but from the realization that he was about to witness the destruction of a place he had spent his adult life protecting. Worse yet, he was powerless to stop it. "Please, have a seat," said the loan officer. A young woman named Sarah, who looked barely old enough to have a college degree. "I've reviewed your application, and I have a few questions about your employment history." Robert sat down, but his attention was divided. Through the glass partition, he could see the three men beginning to move into their final positions. In his mind, he was already calculating the timeline. They would strike during the busy afternoon period, when the maximum number of customers would be present. They would use the crowd as cover and as leverage against any resistance. "Mr. Stevens, I see you worked in bank security for over 20 years. Can you tell me about your experience with risk assessment?" The irony of the question wasn't lost on Rob. "I specialized in identifying and preventing potential security threats," he replied, his eyes still tracking the movement of the three men. "I was particularly focused on robbery prevention and crisis management." "That's impressive. And what led you to leave that position?" Robert forced himself to focus on the loan officer. "Budget cuts. The bank centralized its security operations and eliminated my position." As he spoke, Robert saw the first man walk toward the exit and take up a position just outside the entrance. The second man approached the teller line, but instead of joining the queue, he moved to the side where he could observe the entire banking floor. The third man finished his transaction at the ATM and moved toward the customer service area. They were 30 seconds away from beginning their robbery. "Mr. Stevens, based on your application, you're requesting $18,000 to prevent foreclosure on your home. Given your employment gap and current financial situation, I'm going to need some additional documentation to process this loan." Robert nodded, but his mind was racing through the options available to him. He could try to warn the bank staff, but he had no authority and no credibility. He was just another desperate customer asking for money. He could attempt to call the police, but the robbery would be over before they arrived. He could try to leave the building, but that would mean abandoning innocent people to whatever these men had planned. "I understand," Robert said, pulling out a folder of documents. "I have my tax returns, my pension statements, and references from my former colleagues in law enforcement." The loan officer began reviewing the paperwork, but Robert's attention was focused on the developing situation around them. The man near the teller line had moved closer to the counter, and Robert could see the bulge of a weapon under his jacket. The positioning was perfect. They had created a triangle formation that would allow them to control the entire banking floor while minimizing their exposure to the security cameras. It was exactly the kind of tactical approach that Robert had trained bank staff to recognize and respond to. But the current staff had never received that training, and they were completely unaware of what was about to happen. "Mr. Stevens, I have to ask, given your background in bank security, what's your assessment of our current security measures?" Robert looked at the young loan officer, realizing that she had no idea how prophetic her question was. "I think," he said carefully, "that every security system has vulnerabilities, and the most dangerous criminals are the ones who take the time to study those vulnerabilities." As if on cue, the man near the teller line reached into his jacket. "Everyone get down. This is a robbery." The words that Robert had dreaded hearing for 22 years of his career now filled the air around him. The banking floor erupted in chaos as customers screamed and dove for cover. Tellers ducked behind their stations, and the few security cameras that Robert had helped install began recording what would either be a successful robbery or a tragedy. But Robert Stevens wasn't ducking for cover. His training, his experience, and his intimate knowledge of every inch of this building had prepared him for this moment. Even if he had never imagined experiencing it as a civilian, the robber at the teller line was shouting instructions and waving a handgun, but Robert could see immediately that he was making several critical errors. He was standing too close to the bulletproof glass partition, limiting his field of vision. He was shouting so loudly that he couldn't hear what was happening around him. Most importantly, he was positioned directly in front of the silent alarm button that Robert had insisted be installed at eye level behind the teller station. The second robber was supposed to be controlling the entrance, but he had moved inside to help intimidate the customers. This left the exit unsecured and created a gap in their perimeter. The third robber was attempting to control the customer service area, but he was standing exactly where Robert had identified a blind spot in the camera coverage. These men had planned well, but they had planned for the bank's official security measures. They hadn't planned for Robert Stevens. "Stay down and nobody gets hurt," the robber near the customer service area shouted. "This will be over in 2 minutes." Robert remained crouched behind the loan officer's desk, but his mind was already formulating a plan. He knew that the security company would be notified of the silent alarm in approximately 90 seconds. He knew that the police response time to this location was typically 4 to 6 minutes. He knew that the robbers would try to be out of the building in less than 3 minutes to avoid law enforcement. But he also knew something that the robbers didn't: the locations of every emergency lockdown switch, every panic button, and every security feature that wasn't visible to the casual observer. "Sarah," he whispered to the loan officer, who was trembling beside him, "I need you to listen carefully. When I tell you to, I want you to crawl to the desk behind us and press the red button under the top drawer. Can you do that?" The young woman nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Robert waited until the robber controlling their area turned away to shout instructions to his partners. Then he moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent decades training for crisis situations. The first thing he did was activate the emergency lockdown system, using a hidden switch behind the customer service desk. The system that he had personally supervised the installation of began to engage, sealing the exit doors and triggering additional security protocols. The second thing he did was use his knowledge of the building's layout to move unseen toward the teller area. The robbers were focused on the obvious threats and the obvious escape routes. They weren't watching for someone who knew every architectural detail of the building. The third thing he did was turn his intimate knowledge of the bank's security systems into weapons against the very people they were designed to stop. The emergency lockdown system that Robert had activated was more sophisticated than the robbers could have imagined. It didn't just seal the doors, it triggered a cascade of security measures that Robert had designed to create an impenetrable barrier between criminals and their escape routes. The front entrance doors locked automatically with reinforced steel bolts that could only be opened by security personnel. The windows were reinforced with laminated glass that would resist even determined attempts to break them. The ventilation system switched to emergency mode, which would make the building uncomfortable but not dangerous for occupants. Most importantly, the system activated hidden cameras and recording devices that would document everything happening in the building for use in prosecution and investigation. But Robert's plan went beyond just trapping the robbers. He was systematically destroying their ability to control the situation by using their own tactics against them. The robber at the teller line suddenly realized that the exit doors weren't opening. He began shouting at his partners, but the building's acoustic design, another feature Robert had influenced, was working against them. The sound was echoing and distorting, making communication difficult. The robber controlling the customer service area was becoming increasingly agitated as he realized that something was wrong. Robert could see him looking around frantically, trying to understand why their carefully planned escape route had been compromised. "What's happening?" the robber shouted. "The doors aren't opening." Robert smiled grimly. After 22 years of preventing robberies, he was finally getting to experience one from the inside, and he was winning. Robert's next move was to exploit the psychological pressure that was building within the robbery team. He knew from his training and experience that most armed robberies failed not because of physical resistance, but because of the mental stress that criminals experienced when their plans began to unravel. Using his knowledge of the building's intercom system, Robert accessed a hidden communication panel that he had insisted be installed for emergency use. His voice, calm and authoritative, filled the banking floor. "This is Robert Stevens, former head of security for this bank. The building is now in complete lockdown. The police have been notified and are en route. You have 2 options: surrender now, or wait for the tactical team to arrive." The effect was immediate and dramatic. The 3 robbers looked around frantically, trying to locate the source of the voice. They had gone from confident criminals executing a planned robbery to confused and trapped men facing an opponent they couldn't see or understand. "Who is that?" the leader shouted. "Where are you?" Robert's voice came over the intercom again. "I'm the person who designed every security measure in this building. I know where you are, I know where you're going, and I know exactly how to stop you." The psychological impact was exactly what Robert had intended. The robbers were no longer in control of the situation. They were reacting to his initiative, and their confidence was crumbling. As the robbers became increasingly desperate, Robert implemented the final phase of his plan. He knew that cornered criminals were dangerous, but he also knew that they were predictable. Their desperation would drive them to make mistakes, and he was positioned to exploit every error. The robber controlling the teller area was now trying to force the locked doors open, abandoning his position and giving the tellers an opportunity to trigger additional alarms. The robber at the customer service area was waving his weapon around frantically, but his attention was scattered and his tactical awareness was compromised. Robert used this confusion to move closer to the robber's position. His knowledge of the building's layout allowed him to approach from an angle that they couldn't anticipate or defend against. "Sarah," he whispered to the loan officer, "when you hear the police sirens, I want you to tell everyone to stay down until the officers give the all clear. Can you do that?" The young woman nodded, and Robert could see that her initial panic had been replaced by determination. His calm authority was having the same effect on the bank staff and customers that it had always had on people in crisis situations. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, and Robert knew that the end was near. The robbers were trapped, their escape routes were sealed, and law enforcement was closing in. But Robert Stevens wasn't finished yet. He had spent 22 years preparing for this moment, and he was going to see it through to the end. The lead robber, realizing that the situation was hopeless, made the decision that Robert had been anticipating. Instead of surrendering, he decided to take hostages. "Nobody moves," he shouted, grabbing the nearest customer and pressing his weapon against her head. "I want those doors opened now, or people are going to die." This was the moment that Robert had been preparing for his entire career. The transition from a property crime to a potential homicide situation required a completely different approach, and Robert's training in crisis negotiation and tactical response was about to be put to the ultimate test. "Let her go," Robert said, stepping out from behind the customer service desk. "You're not going to hurt anyone, and you're not going to escape. It's over." The robber spun around, seeing Robert for the first time. "Who are you?" "I'm the person who's been stopping people like you for 22 years. Robert replied, his voice steady and calm. "I'm the person who designed every security measure that's keeping you trapped in this building. And I'm the person who's going to make sure you don't hurt anyone." The standoff that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt like hours. Robert could see the desperation in the robber's eyes, the realization that his plan had failed completely. He could also see the fear in the hostage's face, and the attention of everyone in the building focused on this crucial moment. Robert's training told him to wait for the police tactical team, but his instincts told him that the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The robber was becoming increasingly unstable, and the risk to the hostage was growing by the second. "Listen to me," Robert said, taking a step closer. "I know you're scared, and I know you feel trapped, but hurting that woman isn't going to solve your problems. It's only going to make things worse." The robber's hand was shaking, and Robert could see that he was struggling with his decision. This was the moment when 22 years of experience, thousands of hours of training, and an intimate knowledge of human psychology under pressure would either save a life or fail completely. Robert made his choice. What happened next occurred with the precision of a choreographed dance. Robert's movement was so smooth and practiced that it seemed almost casual, but every element was calculated to achieve maximum effect with minimum risk. He stepped to the side, creating an angle that would make it difficult for the robber to maintain his grip on the hostage, while keeping Robert in sight. Simultaneously, he activated the emergency lighting system that he had insisted be installed throughout the building. The sudden change in lighting created a moment of confusion that Robert used to his advantage. He moved forward with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where every obstacle, every piece of furniture, and every potential hazard was located. The robber, disoriented by the lighting change and the psychological pressure of the situation, made the mistake that Robert had been waiting for. He turned slightly to track Robert's movement, loosening his grip on the hostage, just enough for her to break free. Robert continued his advance, using a combination of verbal commands and physical presence to control the situation. His voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades in command of crisis situations, and his body language projected the confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Drop the weapon," Robert said, his voice carrying absolute certainty. "It's over." The robber looked around the banking floor, seeing the sealed exits, the approaching police sirens, and the faces of people who were no longer afraid of him. His shoulders sagged as the reality of his situation finally penetrated his desperation. The weapon clattered to the floor. The police tactical team arrived to find the three robbers in custody, secured by bank personnel and customers, who had been organized and directed by Robert Stevens. The weapons had been secured. The hostages were safe, and the building was under complete control. Detective Laura Martinez, who had worked with Robert during his years as head of security, was the first to reach him. "Robert, what the hell are you doing here?" "Applying for a loan," Robert replied with a slight smile. "I didn't expect to get this kind of customer service." The investigation that followed revealed that the three robbers had spent months planning their attack. They had studied the bank's layout, its security procedures, and its personnel schedules. They had purchased specialized equipment and developed contingency plans for various scenarios, but they had never anticipated encountering Robert Stevens, and they had never planned for the possibility that their target would fight back with the same level of preparation and expertise that they had brought to the crime. "They did everything right," Robert told Detective Martinez during his statement. "They just did it in the wrong place at the wrong time." The media attention that followed was intense but brief. Robert was praised as a hero. His actions were analyzed by security experts, and his story was featured in law enforcement publications. But Robert himself was uncomfortable with the attention, preferring to focus on the fact that no one had been seriously injured. More importantly, the incident had an unexpected consequence for Robert's personal situation. 3 days after the robbery, Robert received a phone call from the regional manager of First National Bank. "Robert, I want to talk to you about returning to work," the manager said. "We've been reviewing our security protocols in light of recent events, and we realized that we made a mistake when we eliminated your position." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I'm listening." "We want to offer you a position as Director of Security Operations for the entire regional network. It would involve consulting with all of our branches, developing new security protocols, and training staff in crisis management." The offer was generous. More money than Robert had ever made, comprehensive benefits, and the opportunity to do the work he loved on a larger scale. But more importantly, it was recognition of the value of his experience and expertise. "What about my loan application?" Robert asked. "Consider it approved," the manager replied. "In fact, consider it unnecessary. Your signing bonus should cover your immediate financial needs." Robert accepted the position, but not before making one request. He wanted to personally train the staff at every branch in the network, starting with the young loan officer who had shown such courage during the crisis. 6 months later, Robert Stevens stood in the same First National Bank where his career had seemingly ended and then been reborn. But this time, he wasn't applying for a loan or conducting a security assessment. He was leading a training session for bank personnel from across the region. "Security isn't just about cameras and alarms," he told the assembled staff. "It's about understanding people, anticipating problems, and being prepared to respond when plans go wrong." In the audience, Sarah, the loan officer, was taking notes diligently. She had been promoted to assistant manager and was now responsible for implementing Robert's security protocols at the branch level. "The most important thing to remember," Robert continued, "is that security is everyone's responsibility. You don't need a badge or a uniform to protect the people around you. You just need to care enough to pay attention." After the training session, Robert walked through the banking floor, noting the improvements that had been made since his return. New security cameras, updated emergency procedures, and most importantly, staff who were trained to recognize and respond to potential threats. The bank looked different now, but it felt the same. It felt like home. Robert's story became a case study in security training programs across the country. His actions during the robbery were analyzed and incorporated into crisis management protocols for financial institutions. His approach to using existing security systems as active defenses rather than passive deterrence became standard practice in the industry. But for Robert, the most important legacy was simpler. He had proven that experience, knowledge, and the willingness to act could overcome any disadvantage. He had shown that retirement didn't mean the end of service, and that expertise gained over decades of work could be applied in unexpected ways. The three robbers were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, but Robert occasionally thought about them with something approaching sympathy. They had been professionals who had done their homework and executed their plan with precision. They had just encountered someone who had been doing his homework longer. The difference between success and failure, Robert told his training classes, is often just a matter of preparation meeting opportunity. You never know when your experience will be needed, so you have to be ready to use it. Today, Robert Stevens continues to work in bank security, but his role has evolved beyond anything he could have imagined during his original career. He consults with financial institutions, trains security personnel, and develops protocols for preventing and responding to criminal activity. He has also become an advocate for recognizing the value of experienced workers who are often discarded by cost-cutting measures. His story has inspired other professionals to view career setbacks as opportunities to apply their expertise in new ways. The loan application that brought Robert to the bank that day was never actually processed. The paperwork was lost in the chaos of the investigation, and Robert's financial situation was resolved through his new position. But he kept a copy of the application in his desk as a reminder of how quickly circumstances can change. Sarah, the loan officer who had shown such courage during the crisis, eventually became a regional manager herself. She credits Robert with teaching her that authority comes not from a title, but from knowledge, preparation, and the willingness to act when action is needed. The bank where the robbery occurred has become one of the most secure financial institutions in the region, but it has also maintained the welcoming atmosphere that makes customers feel comfortable and valued. Robert's security measures are largely invisible to the casual observer, but they create an environment where people can conduct their business with confidence. As Robert reflects on the events that transformed his life, he realizes that his story is really about the unexpected ways that experience can be valuable. He had spent 22 years preparing for a crisis that he thought would never come, and when it finally arrived, he was ready. The irony of being robbed while applying for a loan wasn't lost on him. He had gone to the bank as a supplicant, asking for help with his financial problems. He had left as a hero, with his career restored and his future secure. But the real lesson, Robert believes, is that expertise doesn't disappear when circumstances change. The knowledge he had gained as head of security remained valuable even when he was no longer officially responsible for security. His training remained relevant even when he was no longer being paid to use it. Experience is like money in the bank, Robert tells his students. You may not need it every day, but when you do need it, you'll be glad you saved it. The men who tried to rob First National Bank that day learned a hard lesson about the value of experience. They had planned for security cameras, alarm systems, and police response times. They had not planned for Robert Stevens, and Robert Stevens had spent 22 years preparing for them. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks the most ordinary. Robert Stevens' story reminds us that expertise doesn't retire, knowledge doesn't expire, and experience is the most valuable currency of all. If this story moved you, subscribe to Real Security Stories for more accounts of ordinary people whose extraordinary backgrounds prepare them for unexpected moments of crisis. Where are you watching from today? Have you ever met someone whose past experience surprised you when it mattered most? Share their story in the comments below.